Hello, Renegade marketers. If this is your first time listening, welcome. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. Before I present today's episode, I am beyond thrilled to announce that our second in-person CMO Super Huddle is happening November 6th and 7th in Palo Alto. We're excited to have 5 flocking awesome founding sponsors: HG Insights, Boomerang, Webless, Firebrick, and Webflow, and an amazing VIP dinner sponsor with Vidoso. Last year, we brought together over 100 marketing leaders for a day of sharing, caring, and daring each other to greatness. And this year, we're doing it again. Same venue, same energy, and same ambition to challenge convention with an added half-day strategy lab exclusively for marketing leaders. Tickets are now available at cmohuddles.com. Do yourself a favor, check out some of the speakers and experts we have. It will blow you away. You can also watch a video that I am confident will get you pumped up. And it also shows what Gen AI video can do right now. Grab your ticket before they're gone. I promise you we will sell out. And it's gonna be flocking awesomer. Welcome to CMO Huddle's Quick Takes, our Tuesday Spotlight series where we share key insights that you can use right away. Today, we're joined by Michael Watkins, professor at IMD Business School and author of The First 90 Days, to talk about his newest book, The 6 Disciplines of Strategic Thinking. He breaks down what it really means for CMOs to step into the strategy sphere, think like enterprise leaders, and build teams that can recognize key priorities, align around them, and turn strategy into action. Let's get into it. I'm thrilled to welcome back Michael Watkins, who joins us today to discuss his latest book, The 6 Disciplines of Strategic Thinking, Leading Your Organization into the Future. For those of you who don't know Michael, he's a professor at IMD Business School, a best-selling author of multiple leadership books, including my all-time favorite business book, The First 90 Days, and someone who has advised countless executives on navigating complex organizational challenges. So what excites me today about Michael's framework is it's not just academic theory, it's a practical roadmap for how leaders, especially CMOs, can lead strategic thinking in their organizations. We talk a lot in this community about CMO plus. Well, that plus could very well be strategy if you understand exactly how to make it happen. So Michael, welcome back. How are you and where are you this amazing day?
Well, delighted to be back, and I live just outside of Zurich, Switzerland, and that's where I am today, mercifully. It's not always the case, Drew, but when I'm here, it feels great to be here, right? I'm sure many of your participants feel the same way when you kind of come to rest someplace. It's a beautiful thing, right?
It is home sweet home, so to speak. Well, look, just in case our audience wants to leave early, needs to leave early, or we need to convince them to stay, maybe you could outline 3, say, biggest mistakes you see leaders, and maybe especially CMOs, if you can, make when it comes to strategic thinking and driving strategy.
So number one is not doing it, not participating in it, Drew. I mean, it's a fairly obvious one, right?
Great.
I mean, these days I'm writing a lot about what I call enterprise leadership, Drew, these days, right? Which is basically, leadership at the top team level, with strategic implications, typically people leading functions like your CMOs are, or regions or business units. And the real criticality of moving beyond both individually and as a team, right? Focusing on your own part of the business or a subset or of people on the leadership team into being what you might think of as a true enterprise leader, right? And maybe the most important dimension of that is participating actively in shaping, crafting, and executing the overall strategy of the organization, right? And so I've been writing recently a little bit about, I call it the wearing the 2 hats problem, Drew, right? Of sort of showing up at the leadership table, both representing your own function, in this case, your CMOs, but also being there as well for representing what's good for the enterprise as a whole. And the challenge you can face in kind of balancing those tensions, right? And I think, maybe not a trap exactly, but an admonition and invocation, right? Which is step into the strategy sphere, right? View yourself as core, because I think you are core to shaping the strategy of the organization, be able to participate actively in the strategic thinking that must go on at the level of the leadership team. Be prepared sometimes, and we can talk about this later if you're interested, to, maybe compromise a bit on what your own organization would love to see happen in the name of the greater good. So that's kind of the big picture framing that
Okay.
I would put on it.
All right, and we'll get into how the
Yeah.
CMOs can do it. And definitely, I mean, we talk a lot about in huddles about being a business leader first and a marketer second, and so you don't
Yeah.
get pigeonholed. And the worst thing you could hear, oh, you're just the marketing person, which is not music to any CMO's ear. So, and we'll talk about that. Okay, but what's the second mistake?
So from a strategic thinking point of view, I think that's a really important and big one, which is not engaging with your team and not building strategic thinking capability in your team, and maybe thinking that you have to be the primary strategic thinker for your team. I'm very big these days. I'm working on a framework for how leaders can deal with the current turbulence, Drew, which is, to me, unprecedented, right? I've done this a long time. I know you've done this a long time. I've never seen in my career before times as challenging as I'm seeing right now, right? And it's technology and AI, obviously, but it's also geopolitics and high levels of uncertainty. And, we could go on and on and on with this, right? And so equipping leaders for the ability to do that, I think, is a big piece of this. And one of the most important things think you need to do as a leader and as a CMO is move from thinking about yourself as needing to exert central control to embracing shared leadership, right? And to me, shared leadership includes, absolutely critically, engaging in a shared way in strategic thinking, right? And so really, and not doing that in a, oh, we're going to have a strategic planning workshop, hurrah, right? Let's all get together and go offsite or onsite these days, who knows, right? And have a session on strategic thinking. No, it's really about how do you embed strategic dialogue into your operating rhythms, right? Every day. How do you encourage strategic thinking and build strategic thinking capability in your team, right? So great that you're already talking about, CMOs need to be business leaders. What I would also add is you need to be builders of strategic thinking capability in your teams and not feeling like you need to do it all on your
Yeah,
own.
that one it's such an interesting one because I wonder, and in this group, and I poll them privately, would they see themselves as building that strategic muscle themselves and broader below? And we'll talk about that more
Yeah.
because I do think how you do that is really important too. And it is a muscle, and you talk about that in the book, that it is, you get better at this by doing it and playing bridge
In
and chess.
part. Yep.
In
In
part, in
part.
part.
In
Okay.
part.
And number three, what is the third one? And then we'll come back and circle back to all of them.
Oh, the biggest mistake CMOs make. I'm going to have to ponder that one a little bit. I do talk a lot about AI these days, and I'm assuming that every single one of you is actively embracing the use of artificial intelligence in your organizations, right? And if you're not doing that, then that would be a huge mistake, right? Now, I'm not, I am hopeful and confident that you're doing that, right? When I talk about strategic or about AI, Drew, I have to do this less now because people are embracing it more, obviously, right? I always put up two images, right? And one image is the dinosaur admiring the beauty of the incoming asteroid, right? And the other is the surfer surfing the huge tsunami, right? And I think I always say you've got to be the surfer with this stuff, and you've got to be embracing it. I'm working, a slight digression, very actively with a very interesting world-class tech platform company right now that I'm engaged in a process with them of reinventing their entire business around networks of agents, right? So agentic AI is kind of very much on the topic list for them, and they're really thinking about their organization, leveraging agentic AI and networks of agents and leveraging some of the new protocols that are available to build that org from the ground up, and exploring what does that mean fundamentally for how you think about organizing, right? Organizing more horizontally and less vertically, or, really connecting processes, thinking about the spirals that have to move through your organization and that core mix of tools and processes and data that is the core of that spiral, right? So I guess, if you're not doing that, be afraid, right? Be very afraid. But again, I assume, most
No,
of you
and
are
I would
are
say
embracing it.
It's funny because this month we happen to be doing all of our peer huddles focused on it, and there isn't a single one coming to those huddles that doesn't have use cases where they're doing it. And I want to circle back
Yeah,
later because on this in terms of using AI for strategic thinking and so forth, which I'm sure you've been dealing with. But let's go back to
absolutely.
so you want a seat at the strategy table.
Yep,
You're a CMO with the title marketing in your function. And
yep,
I'm curious when you're not in a lot of companies, the bigger they are, they might even have a head of strategy, or maybe the CEO is a founder and they believe they are the head of strategy. How does one, as a CMO was not given the mandate, lead us strategically, right? They were given the mandate,
yep,
lead us marketingly, if there is such a.
yep,
So, how do you recommend to folks to that are on the executive committee to sort of help get
yep.
in the mix?
Yep. So I think the starting point for me is getting super clear in your mind about exactly what strategic thinking is and how it differs from strategy. I think we don't need another book in the world on strategy. There's some wonderful stuff out there, but strategic thinking is something different, right? Strategic thinking is a set of mental disciplines that you're engaged in, a set of dialogue processes that you're embarking on that lead eventually to strategy, but often more importantly, lead to changes in strategy, right? And so, when I started doing work on this, Drew, I interviewed, I think probably more than 50 senior executives about strategic thinking. And my first question was, what is strategic thinking, right? And almost without exception, their eyes would kind of defocus a little and, they kind of like strain a bit. And then it was kind of like, I know it when I see it, right? Which isn't very helpful, right? Isn't very helpful because you can't assess people, you can't develop people. I'm sure many of your participants have, seen people who have been told at some point you need to become a stronger strategic thinker. And, what in the world does that mean? And that is that code for we're not going to promote you. So clarifying what strategic thinking was a core part of what I felt like I needed to do, right? And the definition I came up with, which underpins the entire book, right, is this process of recognizing emerging threats and opportunities, right? Establishing the right priorities and mobilizing your organization to do something about it, right? So recognize, prioritize, mobilize is kind of the strategic thinking cycle that I focus on. It's not an accident that the initials of that are RPM. It's, I'm trying to convey that moving around that cycle fast is very important. I'm sort of building, by the way, on work that was done in the military, right, about the revolution of military affairs and how you move faster than your enemy, right? But you'll notice that nothing I just said it is directly about the strategy of the organization, right? It's about adaptation, right? And most of what I'm interested in these days is adaptation, right? It's about how do we build organizations that are more adaptive. And I view that strategic thinking as probably the most important foundation for that, right? There's other things we could talk about. I wrote an article recently on the key elements of adaptive organization, right? So, but if you're not thinking strategically, if you're not recognizing, prioritizing, mobilizing effectively, it doesn't really matter because you're going to get almost inevitably blindsided. And that leads to some interesting sort of tensions between planning and executing and learning and adapting. And how do you sort of strike the right balance between those two things, right? We still need to plan and execute, but typically it's on shorter cycles than we used to. But that critical piece of learning and adapting and how do we really embed that in the organization is critical. And then I think to get back to your question, right, what that means is not that you as a CMO need to be talking about strategy or but you need to be engaging in the process of discussion in a way that conveys you're a strategic thinker, right? And that can be as simple as, if we do this, what happens next? It can be things like, if we sort of step back and take a look at this and think about it from the broader customer perspective, where does that take us, right? If we try to integrate that with what we're doing in product development, right? Does it all fit together? And one of the resources I'll send actually, Drew, afterwards is a Harvard Business Review article that a colleague and I wrote about communicating like you're a strategic thinker, right? So, and it's really about what we're talking about, right? Which is engaging in dialogue in a way that conveys that you are thinking strategically. And I, my father, who was a bit of a humorist, used to say it's important to at least look like you know what you're doing. And so, being able to engage in discussions at the leadership table in a way that conveys that you're thinking strategically, I think is a key piece of this. So that'll be one resource that
Thank you for
I'll,
that.
I'll,
And
I'll be
so I want
sending
to
to
go.
you.
So recognize, prioritize, and mobilize. And so
Yep.
I want to talk about sort of a common challenge that in the last 6 months, because of the economic uncertainty, because of the technological disruption, and CFOs have become CFNOs again. Deal cycles have lengthened, and when you don't win, you typically don't win because they didn't buy anything. It's not even you lost to a competitor necessarily. So a lot of business. And so what happens in that standpoint is they look at the salesperson, the marketing person, they say, well, you're not hitting your numbers. See ya. And there's a bigger issue. And there's probably the need to recognize, prioritize, and mobilize in a different direction.
Yep.
And so I'm imagining that's what this is about. It's like
100%.
it's not a marketing problem right now. It's a much bigger problem that, in fact, marketing can probably help solve, but it's a go-to-market and promise problem.
So absolutely, right. And you're taking us, I think, through in very interesting directions, right? Which is, again, I'm doing a lot of thinking about different pieces of this. And one piece I was writing about was building organizational sensory systems, right? The systems that help you sense and respond to what's going on in the external world, right? And it's one of the articles, again, I'll send to you. And I dug very deeply into how Amazon does it, right? So what are the strategic sensors, if you will, that the organization has to detect what's happening in the external environment with customers, for example, right? Or operationally, what's happening in the supply chain. What are the internal sensors they have that detect what's going on with, engagement levels, as an example? And then how do you kind of integrate that information? How do you apply, and Amazon's brilliant at this, analytical intelligence to get predictive insight out of it so that you're not reacting, right? You're shaping, which is ultimately the goal of this, right? The goal, and again, I go back to some very famous work that was done by the military, is to be the one that is shaping what's happening and not the one that's responding to what's happening. But in order to do that, you need to have that sensory system out there. Think of it as like the nervous system of the organization, right? Sort of that's detecting what's happening, right? And if you have that sensory system working, you get early warning. And you don't, then I think what's critical is you don't get kind of point solutions, point definitions of the problem, right? Congratulations, it's a marketing problem. Congratulations, it's a supply chain problem, right? They're typically much more nuanced than that. And that's, I guess, another piece of this, which is how do you be sure you're solving the right problems? I mean, one of the key things in strategic thinking, and I talk about it a fair amount in the book, is framing problems as a leadership team, right? And making sure you're actually solving the right problem and not, the joke was jumping to solutions, right? You're not predetermining what you think the problem is. Yeah. So I think these pieces kind of fit together. If you've got a sensory system that's seeing what's happening and allowing you to proactively respond, if you're doing a good job of framing and exploring what the real problem is as a team, right? Then you're not going to get caught in this, congratulations, we're going to do a ritual execution of the CMO because, like we can't think of anything else to do, right? Given what's going on.
Well, what's interesting to me is that from a CMO standpoint, they, in theory, have a sensory system as you describe it. They are, a lot of them have services like Gong or Outreach where they're listening to all the calls, or they have customer advisory boards, or they have other ways of recorded input from customers and prospects that are giving them. Now, it may be this moment, it may not be 6 months out, it may not be trend, but it's certainly a lot of data that would at least give them strength at analyzing some of this. I think there's sort of two things I'm wondering about right now. One is the CMO wants to be part of this conversation, and they may or may not be asked. The CMO also has a lot of information in theory that very few other folks have, which is customer data. Customer input. And it feels like that might be
which is a huge source of power, to your point, Drew.
Right. And is that the point that they can use to sort of say, I deserve a strategic seat at the table because I can represent the customer and I kind of know where they're going right now?
Yeah. So yes and no. right? I,
Okay.
I think, yes, absolutely, that information is a source of power. I think sharing that information, is critical, right? But I think then moving beyond that information, right, to say, look, we need to look at this problem, not just from a customer perspective, and here's some customer data that helps us think about that, but, what are the implications for the supply chain, right? What are implications for investment, right? And so again, it goes back to how you're communicating that you're thinking strategically, right? And not locked in your little silo, right? Now, leveraging that information, right? But also saying, look, it's part of our sensory system, right? And we want to fuse it with other information in order to give us a sit rep picture of really what's happening in the organization. So I guess that would be the yes and no, Drew, of what you
Right.
just said. Yeah.
And that's a really important point. I'm going to sort of repeat it at the risk of being redundant, but you've got to connect the dots. Yes, you have the customer information, but connect it to the other elements of the program so people see that you understand the big picture.
And well, then let me add something else, right? Which is one of the hallmarks of strategic thinkers is that they're hypothesis generators and testers. So when you look at that data, you can say, look, that there's a few possible explanations for what's going on here, right? There's this explanation, there's this explanation, there's this explanation. Let's talk about how we're going to test and dive deeper collectively into understanding which of those hypotheses is the right one, right? So not getting locked into kind of solution provision, right? But thinking in terms of hypotheses. And the instant you start talking in a leadership team, in my experience, right, of saying, hey, it could be this, right? And that's, the most obvious place we're going to go and jump. But let's consider the possibility that it's that. And let's at least kind of do a little testing. You're automatically in the realm of demonstrating, I think, that you're a strategic thinker.
That's a wrap on this Huddle's Quick Take with Michael Watkins. In the rest of the conversation, Michael shares how to make time for real strategic thinking, what it takes to embed those habits across your team, and how reflection can sharpen every big decision. Catch the full episode and see the extended discussion on the CMO Huddle's YouTube channel. I'm Drew Neisser, and we'll be back soon with another Huddle's Quick Take. Until then, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong. Renegade Marketers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neisser. Hey, that's me. This show is produced by Melissa Caffrey, Laura Parkin, and Ishar Cuevas. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, and learn more about CMO Huddles or my CMO coaching service, please visit renegademarketing.com. I'm your host, Drew Neisser. Until next time, keep those Renegade marketing caps on and strong.